We're delighted to be here. We've been here not quite 2 months. And the first Sunday that we were here, shortly after we'd arrived and done a couple of things in the community, Jan and I walked to a restaurant in our neighborhood for dinner. And on our way, we passed Washburn Park and heard music. We had just come from the Bach Festival, and the music wasn't quite the same, but it was still alluring and charming. And we walked in there and saw this wonderful, beautiful sight of this glorious park filled with children and families and dogs and great music. And there was just boundless enthusiasm in the air. And Jen turned to me and said, "We're home." Now, that really meant a lot to me. We've started to become familiar with Oregon, and I can't say that we really know this state yet, but I can tell you that we're in love with it. The forests, the mountains, the trout streams that Jen has been on much more than I have. I'm very jealous of that. She's also keeping count of how many fish we each caught, and she's double digits ahead of me so far. Most recently, we went south and west visiting the University of Oregon's Institute of Marine Biology in Charleston and meeting in Medford, Roseburg, Ashland, and other cities with legislators, mayors, county commissioners, community college presidents, most importantly alumni, and also officials from Oregon's federally recognized tribes. Jan and I were able to enjoy the Brit Festival and the Shakespeare Festival. We were able to do a little fishing on the Rogue River, and we literally had our breath taken away at Crater Lake. You are very lucky to live here. We have just come from Kansas, and there was a movie made about that state in which a young woman clicks her heels together and says, "There's no place like home." But she'd never been to Oregon. This Friday, we're going to experience more of this remarkable state. We're going to go to the other side of the Cascades into Oregon's High Plains Desert. And we will be meeting with Oregonians in Fossil, in Bend, Hermiston, Pendleton, and by the way, there's no D in Pendleton for those of you who are wondering about that. I just learned that the other day. We're going to LeGrand, Baker City, and Ontario. And while we're out there, that close to Idaho, we thought we'd slip over to Boise to see if there's anything going on Thursday evening. We got a really gracious invitation from Boise State President Bob Kustra to sit in his box at the game. But Jan and I will be where we belong, in the stands with the Duck fans, watching our victory over the Broncos. Well, you know a little bit about my background from the introductions and from the log that is at your tables. But I want to tell you a little bit more about my background, just so you know where I'm coming from. Some of you may know John Steinbeck's novel Pastures of Heaven. There's a character in there called Junius Maltby. And for those of you who know this book, it's a story of a young boy who escapes the city and spends a lot of time with a guy who just loves the outdoors and doesn't do anything but fish and philosophize and indulge whatever whims he wants in the outdoors. That was my childhood in many respects. I spent long, idyllic summers on the streams and rivers of northern Wisconsin with a guy by the name of Charlie Barrett, who was the very last of a long line of French trappers from northern Wisconsin who had inhabited northern Wisconsin. And Charlie literally, he was about 65 years old at the time, he literally had supported his family of 5 by hunting and fishing and trapping beaver and muskrat and otter, etc. And he lived in the woods and took me under his wing and taught me wonderful things about living in the woods. He also dipped Copenhagen, and he did this with some dedication. And while you were out on the boat with Charlie, he would break into song. He could only sing literally one note, so whatever the song was, it was the same song over and over again. The words changed, but he could sing only one note. And he would recite Victorian poetry, which probably was his education as a child. And as he would recite and sing, the saliva would build up. And he would first deal with this by simply tipping his chin up. But the saliva would continue to build up until it began to sound as though he was drowning. His voice would warble, and then finally he would spit and start all over again. And I spent hours and hours and hours listening to Victorian poetry recited in that way, to the point where I can't recognize it unless somebody's got a dip in their mouth. Well, I wanted to be Charlie Moret when I grew up. But I knew that that wasn't possible for me because he grew up in a time and in a place that doesn't exist any longer, in an environment that was unspoiled, and we don't live in that world any longer. So when those summers came to an end, just like the Junius Maltby character, I had to go out and get a job. And now I have one. After earning my bachelor's degree at the University of Iowa in the history of religions, I was lucky enough to go to India with my wife in 1972 for the first time. And we fell in love with India. I became extraordinarily interested in how law and religion interact to shape societies. I had studied the Jewish tradition and the Hindu tradition to look at those long established legal traditions. And we decided to make India my career. So we went to the University of Pennsylvania, where I got my PhD, as Carolyn mentioned, in 1978. And in the course of that, we spent a lot of time in India. We have been to India roughly every year since 1972. Jan worked for Mother Teresa when we lived in Calcutta in 76, 77, while I was working on my dissertation. And we have deep roots there with lots of friends and business interests. Now you may be thinking that a resume that involves Sanskrit and extensive periods of time in India may not be the most logical foundation for a university administrative career. And if you're thinking that, you're probably quite right, because I don't think that you're going to have, at least this year, another university president who is also a professor of Sanskrit address you. I think I'm the only university president in America who has a degree in Sanskrit. I do read a few languages, and I have had the good fortune to travel extensively internationally. And part of my good fortune in India was to discover very early on what was going to happen in the information technology industry in that country. Now, I came back from India when I first discovered the possibilities of labor arbitrage in the IT industry. And I was living in Austin at the time. I went to Dell Computers, I went to HP, I went to Motorola, I went to IBM, I went to a lot of startups, and tried to explain to all of them the advantages of them investigating opportunities in India. Now, for some reason, a professor of Sanskrit coming into Michael Dell's office and telling him how to run his business didn't have much traction at the time. I was resoundingly unsuccessful for the longest period of time, until I finally got one Texas company interested in doing business in India, and was able to broker a joint venture between Perot Systems and HCL Corporation that is still, I think, the most successful joint venture in Indian business history. That was the beginning of a 10-year run in which I did similar sorts of things for other companies. And that was indeed a great preparation for a university career in university administration. My experience in the business world I always describe as more rigorous, demanding, and valuable than the PhD that I earned in terms of preparation for my career. Now, when I was still a candidate for the presidency at the University of Oregon, Jan and I met with Dave and Lynn Frohnmeyer, two of the most gracious people on earth. I learned very quickly that anyone who would lead must also learn. And I was and continue to be happy to learn from Dave. When we met, the first thing that he did was to hand me a copy of Kenny Moore's biography of Bill Bowerman. Learning about Bill Bowerman gave me enormous insight into what propels Oregonians and Oregon to the levels of excellence that one encounters here regularly. The Oregon Trail imparted to this society a degree of imagination and tenacity and teamwork that is really quite remarkable. Our feeling, Jan and my feelings, was exactly as Bowerman put it, that we are, as he said, all in the same wagon, the same state, and the same life, so we better work together. This is how Oregon's great leaders, the Tom McCalls and the Wayne Morrises, got rivers cleaned up, strikes settled, and improved people's lives in the future. I embrace this attitude without reservation, and I see it as the foundation for this university's reputation for innovation, originality, and extraordinary excellence. Earlier I mentioned our upcoming trip, and I mentioned the town of Fossil. The reason that we're going to Fossil is to meet with Barbara Bowerman. Now in a moment I want to stop and give you a chance to ask me some questions, but let me say a few words about the university as it relates to the challenges that we face in this extraordinary moment of economic difficulty. Very few of us in this room have seen anything like what this country is going through. It looks like we may be turning around a bit, but it's still, as you all know, desperate time. We have, as a society, the remedies to overcome these challenges. But we have to commit our creative intellect and our energies if we are to create an atmosphere that enables universities and their products, those wonderful, brilliant young people, to fulfill their promise and their mission to serve Oregon. In order for us to do this at the University of Oregon, we are going to have to break some molds. We're going to have to create a new relationship with the state. We're going to have to discover and implement new funding models for higher education. Now, the groundwork for many of these ideas has been laid by Dave Frohnmeyer and his superb colleagues at the university. We are well along in our planning, but we will need your energy, your support, your ideas to effect the fundamental changes that I'm talking about. We at the university are proud to be your university. We're proud to be partners in this community with the promotion of the welfare and the well-being of everyone who lives here. Any city that can claim Wayne Morris and Bill Bowerman amongst its heroes, that has a statue of Ken Kesey in its city square, and crowns a slug queen every year, is a remarkable city. This is where we want to be. Just as my boyhood mentor, Charlie Barrett, found his calling on the rivers and lakes of northern Wisconsin, I know that by a very unusual route through Sanskrit, scholarship, and business in India, that we have found our calling here. It's here with each of you in this remarkable, wonderful city that we want to be. We really are home. But we share this home with thousands more who understand, along with Bowerman, that we are all in the same wagon, the same state, and the same life. And we can never forget that. We must work together, hand in hand, side by side as partners to achieve our goals. We are going to do that with you at the university. And I'm very, very keen to get started. Thank you for having me.
you are deemed to be a true Oregonian when you're talking with your friends from Kansas and they say, how can you live in Oregon where it rains all the time, and you simply nod your head in quiet agreement.
Excuse me, I've been here since July 1st. What's this rain? I just wanted to show you, I have my Oregon driver's license. Yes, sir, in the back there.
Welcome to the University of Oregon. The young lady there that introduced you and Dave Fomar put together a fundraiser that triples what their goal was. And you're going to have to do more of it. Put her on your staff. It wasn't $8 or $1 a year.
It's okay with me if it's okay with Carol. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, echoing the warm welcome, I have a question for you. Do you agree that the cheer Go Ducks is far superior to the cheer Rock Chalk Jayhawks Go KU?
Yes. And I will tell you that I am the only person in this room who knows how to say "Go Ducks" in Sanskrit. So I'm going to teach you. It's Hansa Gachantu. Gachantu. Very good. Excellent. Yes, sir.
I see you have this prime requisite for the university president, and that is a sense of humor. Compliment you on that. I wonder what your view is regarding the balance that needs to be made for expenditures for academic purposes as compared to the absolutely extraordinary salaries being paid for athletic coaches and similar.
Can you repeat the question?
For those of you who couldn't hear the question, what are my views regarding the imbalance between what we spend on education and the salaries that one pays coaches? You may not be surprised to learn that that's not the first time someone has put that question. But I will say that it's really important to remember that academics and athletics are not the same thing. Athletics are entertainment. Now, we talk about student athletes, and indeed they are student athletes, but 80,000 people pay an extraordinary amount of money to go and watch these kids play a game on a Saturday afternoon. I've never had 80,000 people attend a lecture on Sanskrit, and probably won't, and even if I did, they wouldn't pay what they pay to go to those games. It's really important for all of us to remember that this is entertainment, and it is not education. Education is something quite different. There's tension on every campus between athletics and academics, and if you look at it from my perspective, that tension is actually an indication of a healthy thing. The faculty on the campus at the University of Oregon are so passionate and so committed to what they do, so certain that what they're doing in their laboratories, in the libraries, in the classrooms are so compelling and so important that they can't understand why all of us aren't just doing what they're doing. That's really the case. These people are passionate about what they do. And so when suddenly someone says, well, we're going to pay $650,000 to someone to be a coach or an athletics director or whatever, their first question is, if you had $650,000, why wouldn't you build a better lab so that my students and I could do better work? And that's a great attitude to find. It's a tough question to deal with, but it's a great attitude. It's the mark of a great institution to have faculty like that. So that's why we've got to keep clearly in mind that this is entertainment, it's not education. And we are very fortunate at the University of Oregon that the university's athletics program is self-sustaining. It is one of, I think the last count, something like 13 or 14 programs in the country in Division I that are not being subsidized either by state general funds or by tuition dollars. They are being paid for by people who are willing to pay a lot of money to attend athletics contests. And, you know, we may argue with one another about what that says about a society, that a society is willing to pay millions of dollars to watch kids throw a football around, but not very much to educate K through 12 students. I am very sympathetic with those questions, but it's important to remember that education and academics are not the same thing. Education and athletics are. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, welcome. In addition to your administrative responsibilities, are you planning to teach some Sanskrit or other courses?
Not in the first couple of terms. Taking over a job like this is a little bit like trying to drink from a fire hose. No matter how thirsty you are and how hard you hold that hose, it's pretty hard to keep it under control. I will teach probably next academic year. By that time, I hope to have quenched a little more of my thirst in terms of knowledge of the institution. I enjoy teaching enormously and taught at the University of Kansas, the Sanskrit course there. So I'm looking forward to that. Yes?
Thanks again for coming. We all look forward to your tenure here. I'm a graduate of the University of Washington, so I apologize for asking a hard question.
We're working on a vaccine for that.
It sounds to me like you foresaw and maybe even enabled the trend towards outsourcing. Apologize if I misread your comments about IT technology in India.
Yes.
But how do you, if that is indeed the case, how do you see the role of education in retaining jobs that are being outsourced in the country now?
Yeah, the question was that since I was involved in the early stages of information technology transfer in India, how do I see education in terms of preserving jobs in this country? There is nothing more important than education in order to preserve jobs. I spent 24 years at the University of Texas in the College of Liberal Arts. I was lucky enough to be dean of that college for 7 years. And I got a lot of questions from parents on this matter. My son or daughter wants to study history or philosophy or English, and what good is that when they need to be studying engineering or business or accounting or whatever? And my response to that really grew out of my experience in the information technology industry. What those CEOs and cutting-edge entrepreneurs were looking for was not the kind of cookie-cutter education that we might think would be necessary in the technology arena. They were looking for people who knew how to think critically and creatively. One of the constants in this country of American labor histories for about the last 60 years is that the average number of job changes in the course of a working lifetime is 10. That's been true for all of us. For the kids who are in school right now, the projection is that that number will be at least 15 and probably closer to 20 in the course of their working lifetimes. Now add to that the other side of the prediction of labor economists, that 50% of the jobs that these kids will hold don't exist yet. If someone had come to you 10 years ago and said, you know, what I really want to do is study anthropology so I can work for a search engine company, none of you would have had any idea what that person was talking about. But that person's working for Google today and probably got great stock options and a fortune in the bargain. We don't know what these kids are going to be doing in their lifetimes, other than the certainty that it's going to be very different than our careers. Now, in light of that, what are you going to study? What are you going to study to prepare yourself for that rate of change, innovation, uncertainty, anxiety? And my response to that is, you better know who you are, where you're coming from, and what's important to you. If you graduate from a university knowing those three things, you've got a great education. If you graduate just knowing how to read a balance sheet or just knowing how to balance a chemical equation, you've got a set of technical skills that's a very short shelf life. And our job at the university is not to train people with technical skills, but to educate them, to teach them who they are, where they're coming from, and what's most important to them, what their passions are. It's a tough thing to do. There's no simple formula. And I can't point to a set of numbers that indicates that we've done it for 50%, 60%, 80% of the kids. But every one of you in this room knows someone who's had their lives transformed on a campus like the University of Oregon's. Even, hard as it is to imagine, at the University of Washington. And that's what we're here for. Yes, sir.
Welcome, Mr. President, Sun City Golf.
Sat Sri Akal, Sadaji.
I'd like to ask a hard question, and it will be truly to have an answer. A world-class medical facility was built here, and one of the goals was to integrate that facility and the university. And there were roadblocks to that. I don't know if you're aware, this particular situation, but it was something that would bring a great amount of economic development and thus cash to the university.
Well, I'm not familiar with the roadblocks you allude to. I can tell you that just a little over 2 weeks ago, I had a meeting with the board of directors of Keith Health. Introductory opportunity for me to meet them and them to meet me. I was so taken with that experience on a Thursday morning that I went out to Riverbend that afternoon and toured their admissions process, saw one of their pre-op facilities, and I figured that since I was there, I might as well have my appendix out. So I did. And I can tell you that there were no roadblocks in that experience. Well, you have been very gracious to give me your time, to invite me, and to be significant contributors to the creation of a remarkable city in a remarkable state. And I want to thank you for all of that.